Hi guys, I'm Shmi, hello and welcome back to the channel where you join me today to visit by far the most spectacular collection of cars that I have ever seen. Welcome to the Simeone Foundation Automotive Museum here in Philadelphia in the United States. We're going to be taking in 100 or so cars that tell the story of the last century in motorsport, the spirit of competition. In fact, easily the most valuable collection I've ever seen, because behind me, for example, is the winner's circle, cars that were victorious in their respective races: the Mille Miglia, Le Mans, the Nurburgring. We have an Aston Martin DBR1. We have a Bugatti with quite the story we need to unravel, the Bugatti Tank. Opposite over here is a car that I'm going to be experiencing later on. I've never been out in a Ford GT40. This GT40 Mark II isn't just any old car. This is a car that took part in the very famous 1966 24 Hours of Le Mans, the year that Ford won it for the first time, and we're going to be hearing and seeing that in a moment. But this collection has 100 or so cars we're going to try and take in. Walking around through the space, there's a Shelby Daytona Coupe, which was the original prototype. It's a collection that was born out of Fred Simeone's desire to celebrate what motorsport was all about. We're coming up to a psychedelic liveried Porsche 917. As we come a little bit further along, there's a Ferrari 250 Testarossa. This gives you a little insight into what today is about. I cannot believe this. They run demo days. They get these cars up and running. All of them are ready to go. Plus there's a library, 20,000 square foot of memorabilia, artworks, literature from manufacturers, so much more. So let's explore here at the Simeone Foundation Automotive Museum. We're going to go for a quick walk around, but every single one of the cars here has quite the story. We begin back at the start of the 20th century, the 1909 American Underslung. In fact, this car right here, the 1907 Renault Racing Roadster, is a car that a customer wanted to commission. Renault wouldn't make them unless he could find 10 others. So that's how it came to be, finding a group of friends to each make the purchase. That's a 1908 Stanley Steamer, which is actually on loan here at the moment. I've actually driven one of those before, which was quite the experience. But the thing I have to stress and point out about all of these cars as we walk past is that they're all ready to be driven. Every single one, pop in a battery if it needs it, some fuel, some gas, and they're good to go. Think about that for a second. Even things like the 1921 Duesenberg race car just here. This is, well, road racing reborn in America here. The history at Watkins Glen. All of the cars are broken down into different sections, into different categories, depending on what they're all about. But I want to come and take a look at this, because this is an iconic car to me. We've got special permission today to head behind the barriers to go and show you the cars in a little bit more detail. But this is one of the 6 Shelby Daytona Coupes. This is the prototype, the missing car, the car that from the 70s through until the early 2000s had completely vanished. Nobody knew where it was. And you have to think of the historical significance and what this actually represents, what this car was, being the prototype and being fully as it was originally. It's been preserved. It's about preservation. This car has not been restored. It was part of the gathering when all 6 actually met up at Goodwood a few years back. But this was the precursor before distractions came in for the Ford GT40 program. This was the car that was the record holder at the Bonneville Salt Flats back at the time. This is the car that itself holds so much history, even to just touch on the names of the people who have been behind the wheel of that car. And I'm standing here right alongside it, which is a little bit mad to think about. Little Austin Healey here, which was actually the world's fastest production car, 142.6 miles per hour. Back at the time. They made quite a few thousand, I think just over 10,000 of those in total. But each of these has a story, as I said. Let's head onwards. We move to some of the British and German highlights. Here are Riley Brooklands, Jaguar SS100. These are cars that, of course, have history in the UK. At Brooklands, a Bentley 4.5 litre supercharged. This Vauxhall could actually go 100 miles per hour in 1921, the first 100 mile per hour car post World War I, which is a little bit terrifying if you think about it. Over here, though, some of my personal highlights. We have a pair of BMW 328s, which were unbelievably victorious back in the 1930s, and of course the Mercedes 300 SL, with this section being themed after the Nurburgring, somewhere very close to my heart, with some amazing videos playing and photos and things of what these cars were doing back at the time. Obviously this in the 1950s was in many ways connected to the successes of Stirling Moss at the Mille Miglia and the stories from that period. But talking Mille Miglia, head on to the next area. Welcome to Italy, also of course home to the Targa Florio, but there's quite the Alfa Romeo collection here, also a Bugatti Type 35. The Type 35 is the winningest car of all time. The model that has the most race victories to its name was the Type 35, but when it comes to Alfa Romeos, we have a 6C right here, but it's the collection of 8Cs that really make this quite extraordinary. The biggest collection of 8Cs in the world. We have a 2300 right here. Sitting up at the back there is a 2900A, which was actually the runner-up to the 1937 Mille Miglia. Then we have the 2300 Monza, which was raced in 1933, and there are two others that are part of the collection as well. In fact, the 2900B, the sister car to that, we're going to go and see quite shortly. A fun tidbit, come on through here to the workshop where a new arrival, actually, a recent arrival, is the Alfa Romeo Tipo 33. This car raced in the World Sports Car Championship in the 1970s, is currently having some work done to get it up and running. Finding parts like injectors for cars like this, they're not exactly off the shelf when there aren't so many of them, but it's being done right here in the workshop, which just feels like a throwback to a race team shop from that era, seeing this like this. This is the salon of sports car design and style. We have European cars as well as American cars. In fact, two Ferraris that are here on loan to the museum from a collector, but we've got all different eras, different decades as we make our way through. Probably the most varied mix of cars of any of the areas we've been. The 1930s Squire Roadster, considered by many to be the most beautiful English sports car of its era. The Bugatti 57 Atlante, one of not all that many. Of course, the Atlantic is the most famous, we could say, the black car, the missing car, and that whole story. But that's a work of art, a masterpiece of its era, well worth some attention as we go through. But just the complete mix of different things that you can see as we make our way through. Cars that were significantly impactful to their different eras, their design, their racing prowess. We've got the Delahaye's, just everything in one place. And in fact, if we come on through, I'm going to pick out two cars up here that have their own really quite fun stories. This 300 SL Gullwing actually belonged to the late Fred Simeone's father. His father had purchased this on Fred's guidance and had kept it a bit of a secret from Fred, but basically he's purchased it back, kept the two together effectively, and this is completely original. You can see marks in the paint, you can see cracks in the sills. It's untouched, definitely the most original of this specification that exists out there. This is quite fun as well, the 1963 Corvette Grand Sport Roadster here, because this is actually a replica body for the car that we haven't seen because it's currently out, but it was built by the previous owner of the car so that he could use it for vintage racing without damaging the real thing. It's as such travelled to this collection now, and it's remained, and it's here as well, the only replica, if you will, that's part of the entire setup. This is a little bit different, the 1970s Plymouth Superbird Roadrunner, just tucked in there, but you can see, I mean, with the Corvette from the 60s as well alongside, quite how this is evolving as we go. On to international racing, and we start with two very iconic Jaguars, the C-Type and the D-Type, instantly recognisable. Now this is quite the lineup ahead of us, but let's pick out some of the highlights again as we walk past a Bentley, the fourth of the five Alfa Romeo 8Cs, the Le Mans. They raced these back in the early 30s at Le Mans. We've then got a 1934 MG, followed by a 1936 Aston Martin Le Mans. Now the next car is actually quite a fun story I've just learned. This is a Peugeot Dalmar. Now, Le Mans then, as it is today, has certain requirements and regulations, and one of those was that you had to have a windshield, a windscreen. Now, Peugeot felt that wasn't the perfect option in terms of the aerodynamics, so what they introduced is a little lever down here that after the first lap, once it's past everything that it needs to, the driver can lower the windshield down and then continue like that for the rest of the race. Why not, hey? The things that you learn. We then have a Delahaye, we then have a Talbot Lago, and we then arrive at some of the Ferraris. This is a 375mm. It's actually a different body because its gentleman owner was rather tall, and as such, it's got a different windshield that's taller. It's also got a slightly different setup, but it's the running gear of a 375mm. We've then got a Maserati 300S with a 6-cylinder engine opened up at the front, and then we come to a car that has a lot of historical significance, the Ferrari Testarossa. This is in fact the first production Testarossa, and there's something different about it to the other cars. You'll notice with the nose. They are formed into the bodywork on the others, but for this car, the idea was that to make the car easier to transport, you could detach the nose and separate it off. Now, of course, that clearly wasn't needed, which is why the others have it as part of the original car. This was actually repainted from its original silver in the late 60s into this red on red. It was one of Mr. Simeone's dream cars, and of course it's one of the most special cars here. Now, on loan to the collection, we have a 250 GT Berlinetta that also raced at Le Mans. We then have the next car is a Le Mans winner, the 1963 250p. This is the car that won Le Mans in 63, the precursor to the 250 LM, which won in 65, ahead of obviously Ford and the GT40s that we'll be focusing on in a moment. The 917 in the psychedelic livery stands out from a mile away. Iconic 1970s Porsche race cars, perhaps different to some of the cars we've seen earlier, but instantly recognizable, the most famous of Porsche race cars, really. And then check out what we've got here from Ferrari, the Testarossa, 180 Testarossa, I should say, and the Bugatti Baby, the original Bugatti Baby, along with the other pedal cars and a couple of MGs that are all on loan here as well. Into the winner's circle, and to stand around these cars and their history is unreal. The DBR1 that was driven at Le Mans by Sir Starling Moss, the Briggs Cunningham, the Alfa Romeo 8C. I need to go through each of these cars. Let's come past the Bugatti for a moment, because this was the 1927 Nurburgring winner, the same year that Mercedes and Benz had actually joined. This is the Mercedes-Benz Sportwagen. The engine was actually designed and engineered by Dr. Ferdinand Porsche. Mercedes and Porsche together in this car, which is quite unusual if you think about it, but obviously a huge period of success followed for Mercedes, especially going onwards from then. The Bugatti here is actually quite a sad story, if you will. This is one of what was originally 3 of these, the 57G tank. It's the only surviving car though. Now, you might recognize the color scheme if you followed the more recent period with the Veyron Legends. It's the same color scheme as one of those 6 editions after Jean-Pierre Vimille, who drove this to victory at Le Mans in 1937. This car was victorious. Now, following that and numerous other outings, it's a bit of a sad tale. Ettore Bugatti's son, Jean Bugatti, was driving one of the other 3 and sadly avoiding a cyclist, had a fatal accident and passed. Ettore was of course completely destroyed by that, and as a result they got rid of the other 2 cars, the other one with no history and of course the car that had been in the accident, keeping this because of its historical significance. A car that had won the races, had also been behind numerous different endurance speed records, but it was then, with the invasion of the Nazis for the Second World War, effectively buried, with most of the team no longer being with them afterwards to try and find it, with only one person knowing where it was and digging it up and keeping it today here. This is priceless. It's the only one in the world, this car right here in that same livery. In fact, to do the Legends edition, they actually scanned the paint colors off this car, this one right here. Now, talking race winners, we then have the 1938 Mille Miglia winner, the Alfa Romeo 2900B, red on red, again the exact car that won Le Mans, the 5th 8C in the collection. We move to the Briggs Cunningham. Briggs Cunningham being an American team competing, this car won its class at Le Mans back in 1954. It was actually 3rd place overall. Many different famous names were behind the wheel of these at the time, and backed as well by some big names also. We get to one of the most beautiful cars ever, the Aston Martin DBR1. Now, the DBR1 most famous for Aston Martin's outright victory at Le Mans in 1959. This car actually run that very year, and it was Starling Moss, as I said, who was driving it. It was the car that was used to bait the Ferraris. Ferrari were dominating everything. This was used in a slightly different setup to head out in front and to ultimately try and encourage the Ferraris to break down so that the other DBR1 could go on to be victorious. And that's exactly what happened. It also happened to win, and we've got all of the different laurel wreaths up above, the 1958 Nurburgring race as well. And just to look at it and to be standing here, and like all of these, very few words, and again, they're all drivable, they can all be started. But let's head over to the Fords. On this side, we have a pair of Stutz from the 1920s, the 1930s DuPont Roadster, and then we get to the Ford GTs. And it's so interesting to study these cars. They have such a long history with the UK. Of course, I'm lucky to own the new Ford GT, which pays tribute to this, pays tribute to these racing back in the 1960s, in 1966. That's why they made the new car. This was part of a big fleet of them that went out that year, having had an attempt at the previous year. Of course, Ford determined to go and beat Ferrari at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. This car took part in 1967, the Mark IV, so 467. They gave it this new body, the longer tail, the new shape that you can see to it, but actually they then changed the regulations, engine size, etc. for 1968 and 69, hence the return from the Mark IV back to the Mark IIs, which were then victorious with the Golf livery GT40, the same car wearing number 6 and number 9, different numbers, but the same physical car, which is quite a special story. They're all right-hand drive as well, and they also have this little bubble up on the roof. This is actually the Gurney bubble, because Dan Gurney, who was driving these, was a rather tall gentleman and needed room for his helmet inside the car, and as such they all have that little bubble up on top because they were jumping between the different cars while they were racing. Now I believe we're going to get this started and take a listen to it and then take it outside, and then this is going to be quite something. We're joined now by Kevin Kelly from the team here at the Simeone Foundation. Thank you in advance, but can you tell us more about this car?
Well, it's a wonderful car, Ford GT40, 1966, participant in the 66 Le Mans, which of course Ford ultimately won, not only won, but smashed it, 1, 2, 3. And this was a participant, but a DNF. John Whitmore, Frank Gardner took it out, ran it for 5 hours, clutch failure, car didn't finish, but in that great show, dominated ultimately by the Fords.
Absolutely part of it, and this was entered by Alan Mann Racing as well.
Yes, Alan Mann car, part of that team. Of course, we had Shelby running a team, John Wire running a team, Alan Mann running a team, because Ford pulled out all the stops after a couple of years of pushing for this Le Mans win unsuccessfully. So this time he's in deep. Yeah,
we're absolutely committed to the cause. It's amazing to think this actually drove in that famous race, and you are kindly going to allow me to hop on board with you to pull it out now.
Yes, it's a wonderful car. We love them all. Dr. Simeone called them his babies. And yeah, we'll give this a couple easy laps around our back lot here.
Sounds fun. Let's take a listen to it and get it started.
Okay.
This is the very careful process. You've got to step over the shifter. That's a man who's done this before.
Yes, so we have that. We have a little reverse lockout here. A plate that would slide there to block reverse. So battery master, fuel pump, and ignition. Now we're hot. Starter buttons down here. She takes a couple pumps. It's a carburetor with a pump.
Wow. Look at this. I love seeing the car coming through when we've been exploring. To go outside. Right, into the sunshine we go. It's very loud, but let me come through. Pop open the door. Do you mind if I join you?
Please join me.
So, carefully does it.
Me aboard.
Legs into the footwell, slide down. It's tiny in here. Then get very careful with the door. Is that enough? Maybe not. There we go.
And you're taller than me. You could use that bubble.
Yes. You've got the helmet bubble in the ceiling.
Right. Little gurney treatment.
Wow. This is absolutely phenomenal.
Fantastic car.
This is really very loud, but a dream. Wowzers. back. Rev counts are very prominent in the centre. The noises are unreal.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Imagine driving this at full pelt at Le Mans, Circuit de la Star. I need to turn the camera on my face because this is an experience from another dimension. First ever time in a GT40. This is the Ford story, this is what it's about. I mean, there have been so many legendary Fords over the years. Everything that they've done, everything that they've created. I hope that you can hear me. Almost in tears of happiness as we just loop around in here. You're smiling too, I see it.
Well, I actually like the small cars. These big cars are too much for what we can do here, obviously. You know, we call these the big cars, the big engine cars, the high-speed cars. What we really enjoy here putting on the show with are smaller cars, MGs, and even your Alfas, which are the power cars of the 1930s.
Yeah.
But it's, you know, when you get into these cars, you're bridging into the prototypes, and they're 200-mile-an-hour cars.
Yes.
We have a 40-mile-an-hour track.
They're designed for being driven down the
So of course we
Mulsanne
love them. What we really love is the history. The cars are just fantastic, but it's a big car for here.
Well, this was an absolute dream. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Shmay. Happy to have you. Hi to your audience, and yeah, check out that dash. Isn't that just wonderful? This is so workmanship here. This is all business.
And it's interesting as well, because obviously I know more about the newer cars, but even the dials and this layout was carried through to the 100-year anniversary GT. Mm-hmm. Just the whole style of it. But this is race car.
But there's a basic simplicity that's all about the business of getting out there and winning.
Yeah, what a glorious thing. I can't thank you enough to I'm just a little bit lost in it all. To open this up and take a little look at it then. So it pops open, folds towards the back. Wow.
So we have an aluminum 427, single 4-barrel carburetor here. And what are these boxes?
What are those boxes?
Okay, Le Mans, it's a race for a touring car, for a road car.
Yeah.
It's not a Grand Prix race. And what does a real sports car do? It carries you around, maybe from town to town, maybe for recreation, maybe for racing. Le Mans wanted to enforce that idea, and part of that is luggage capacity.
Okay.
You don't go touring without luggage, so a suitcase has to fit into the boxes for the car to qualify for the race.
You could fit the kind of luggage in here that you can take on an aeroplane. You could fit some cases in there. Might get a bit hot right next to the exhaust and gearbox and things, but wow, I never saw that before.
Now, there were some years at Le Mans where you had to carry the equivalent weight of a passenger, 200 pounds with you.
Okay.
Or you're running an open car, you have to run it with the top erected for so many laps, and if the top is tattered after that time, you're disqualified. You don't have a real car. So Le Mans is all about racing a sports car or a road car. Of course, we get to this car and we're crossing into prototypes, but that is the spirit of Le Mans.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting to think about that, actually. And just to see all of this. It's time to take the car back indoors. Listen to this. Nowhere else will you see a GT40 rolling past a 375mm, a 300S, a 250 Testarossa, 250 GT Berlinetta, 250p, 917. Wow, the sounds it drives through here. We're about to go and take a look at the library, and I would say this is even more impressive than the cars, if you're into this kind of thing. But I want to draw your attention firstly to this painting up on the wall here. This was previously in a restaurant in New York, depicting all sorts of very well-known drivers. In fact, there is even a photograph of Fangio in front of this very same artwork, which is now displayed here. But if we come on through, this is something that Fred Simeone started when he was 10 years old, collecting literature, artifacts, all sorts of things connecting to the automotive world, some dating back to the 1700s. In fact, there are over 10 million different items in this collection that cover 2,000 different manufacturers. I want to pick out a few things as we make our way through, but there is so much covering the automotive world throughout, well, just about anything that I can look at in here. The different display signs, the brochures, the manufacturer information, the books, the pieces from cars. I mean, we have the case here for a toolkit of a 300 SL. In fact, actually right here, if I open this, the collection of these started when Fred was 10 years old and he was collecting for the library. So he actually had a letter from the curator of automotive collection at the Free Library in Philadelphia, authorizing him to go and collect multiple copies of information, one for the library and one for his own collection. That's where it all began. To now have this much by way of, I mean, magazines and books, and keep coming through. In fact, I want to come and show you some things just over this way. Of course, all of the history of each of the cars that now form part of the collection as well. But for example, I've gone straight to the GT40 book, or box I should say. We have even an advert here from before the 69 race showing the wins from the 3 previous years. We have some of the prototype graphics and information and artworks and different brochures and catalogues. All of this information dating back obviously to the 60s. Plenty of books off in the background as well for Ferrari, for plenty more. And just knowing how much is here, this is just one of the rooms. There are multiple rooms featuring all of this, documented and completely covering the entire history. There can't be anywhere with as much information in the world as this. Back down in the main hall, the GT40 has been parked, while the Mark II has been parked up again alongside the Mark IV. A big thanks to Kevin for taking me for a couple of quick runs around in that. Just the experience has been unreal. In fact, we've been here for rather longer than you might realize, just taking it all in, because you don't see this level of historical significance in the automotive world in one place in a way that you can visit as a member of the public like this very often. They put on demo days every couple of weeks, taking these cars around to let people hear them, to feel them, to be part of it, because that's what's, I think, so inspiring, but also makes you reflect on where all of the modern cars have come from. Without these, we wouldn't be where we are now. And to be standing here next to this Mercedes, this Bugatti, this Alfa Romeo, the Briggs Cunningham, the Aston Martin, it's just out of this world. I have genuinely never been anywhere quite like this. The specialness of this place is beyond words. And of course, if you're in the Philadelphia area, or if you're even in New York or DC or something like that, come and visit, come and have a visit. Open almost daily, and with all of these cars to be able to take in as well. Today has been mega. A huge thanks to the team from the Simeone Foundation Automotive Museum, and of course to the late Fred Simeone for putting this together in the first place. Absolutely phenomenal. What a day it's been. So thank you very much for watching, guys. I appreciate your support as always, and I'll see you again very soon. Cheers.